Not want to be this person. It would never happen. Yeah, technology.
We had to scan a bunch of stuff. And I know how to do it, but it was like a couple of years. And then finally it clicked and I was like, okay, do you know how to do this? But
Well, that's like being able to my office. So I had to relearn how to comment stuff. This kid's like, oh, big tree.
yeah.
No clue.
And it's just funny how some time goes between and you're like,
Yeah, I got nothing.
oh look, our friend.
They would figure you'd check it out.
It's my buddy.
Newest member.
The newest member.
It's my birthday, buddy.
Grayson, how are you,
They will
buddy?
see how you feel.
Oh, my goodness.
I got all sorts of ideas for my birthday, but they were so I know Uber always gives suggestions, but I just stay away from the balloons. Yeah, I've seen so many babies right off that ice take. It's the first birthday cake and it's just there for days.
I can believe that.
Someone I just saw had their first birthday with blue ice cake. It was like old and blue.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm happy that it's such a beautiful night to walk over here. Don't suffer through the humidity or anything like that. I did hear that we're kicking off the volleyball season up at the Mallory, so I'm glad that it wasn't tonight because we would have been standing room only over here. But welcome, everybody. Appreciate you coming, both in Zoom world and here in the room. Just a reminder to everybody that we're recording the Zoom call, and if you see your neighbors around and they want to know what's going on with the Civic League, please encourage them to go to the website, and the recordings of all these are on our website. If you could click to the next slide. So the agenda for tonight, I'm just going to give a quick update of Civic League business, and we'll pass it over to Sam Woomer of Dogtown and the Paddock to talk about his new business. Delegate Jackie Glass is here. Thank you for being here. She's going to give us an update on what's been happening up in Richmond with the last legislative session, and some Q&A with you. And then we're going to shift over to the main topic for today, which is the proposal to start down the process of applying to do a state or national historic or historic register historic district for West Ghent. And we can talk about that more in a few minutes. So with that, I'll kind of shift over here. So this is the last regularly scheduled meeting before the summer starts, right? So I just wanted to take the opportunity to kind of wrap up where we've gone since December until now with the Civic League and talk about what we've done and where we're going. So just going back to the bylaws of the Civic League, those big things are my boiled down statements of the purposes in our bylaws, right? So to promote good fellowship. So what have we been doing to promote good fellowship in the neighborhood, right? We've had a ton of social events. Thank God that COVID supports. We've done all, with the exception of these meetings, we've done all outside meetings, and it's been great. We've had huge show up. The pizza social we did a few weeks ago had like 90 people show up. One before that was 70 people. Kids running around at Graydon Place Park. So that's the end of summer social we did last summer, the summer kickoff social that I was just referring to. We've got the 4th of July bike parade coming up for all the kids. Of course, everyone's a big fan of the holiday tree lighting, where I think we had, I didn't count, but it looked like we had at least 300 people at that holiday tree lighting in partnership with the Westover Garden Club. Of course, we did the Halloween pumpkin painting event and the movie in the park there. We had our chili cook-off, which is our first one. I think we got unanimous consent that we want to go ahead and keep doing that on an annual basis. I look forward to it this year. And then we're doing these routine kind of scavenger hunts for the kids around the neighborhood. So I think we've achieved a lot this year so far with social events. I will say that one of the things that we talk about as a board is to make sure that we're serving all residents of the neighborhood. So I fully acknowledge that many of the events we've been doing have been very much like family centric, families with young kids. If you have ideas for different types of social events, we're all ears, and we're especially open to people taking part as part of the social committee and just taking over a small sliver of something, one event, or getting people together for anything. You don't need to take on too much, but many hands make little work. Another thing about good fellowship is helping neighbors in times of need, right? Many of you know, but we raised nearly $40,000 for the victims of the Greenway Court apartment fire last year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I thought it was fantastic. It was a true community effort. We had strong support from neighboring civic leagues, neighboring area businesses doing fundraisers, and then all just filing into the pot that we created on the GoFundMe page, and then working closely with the church here to get with the residents and get the money out to everybody. I thought it was amazing how quickly everyone came together to do that.
Thank you, guys.
We've been supportive of our healthcare workers and the police department by creating care packages, especially during when we were on COVID, the lockdown and things like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about another one we're going to be doing here shortly. The next thing is kind of responsible stewardship of the neighborhood, right? So I think you're well aware that we do quarterly neighborhood cleanups, and we've got another one coming up here this month. And I also consider our stewardship and kind of environmental stewardship to be our engagement with our corporate neighbors, right? MHI, we've been working closely with them to make sure that we all have the same sight picture of being good neighbors to keep West Ghent and Chelsea the special place that it is. We've included in that is some engagement with the Navy itself to make sure that the customer for the ships that are being refitted at MHI, the Navy understands our perspective on that. And then also in partnership with the city council and Courtney, taking part in the Ghent task force and having a voice on issues around the Ghent area is huge. And then of course there's the Hampton Boulevard task force that we take part in that's coming up this coming week to talk about concerns that we have related to Hampton Boulevard. So we've been busy. One of the most important ones to me is to unite, come together and interchange ideas geared towards improving our neighborhood, right? So some of the volunteer projects we've done, we just started up the crepe myrtle pruning initiative, where we're going to get together probably quarterly and go around the neighborhood and help the city with pruning the crepe myrtle trees throughout the neighborhood. And then thanks to Taz here, we're starting up, we're seeking volunteers, small groups of 2 or 3 people at a time for an hour of your time to take care of the signposts throughout the neighborhood. And many of you have already reached out volunteering either for specific signs or for just anywhere in the neighborhood, and we couldn't appreciate it more. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well. And then another one that's coming, right, is community safety. So there's some changes afoot with, obviously we've seen changes nationally and locally with violent crime and other crime. And the board is responding by kind of coming up with a new approach that has seen success in other parts of the country regarding community safety committee. If you're interested in getting involved with community safety, I ask you please reach out. And Casey White is in charge of the community safety committee, and we've got an initiative coming this summer. So we're supposed to, our purpose is to cooperate with the local government and other organizations engaged in worthy causes of common interest while maintaining strict nonpartisan behavior, nature of the Civic League. And so you know that we routinely have our elected city officials come and talk to us and give us updates. Courtney obviously is almost always involved. And then today we have Delegate Jackie Glass here to give us the update. We've also, engagements with nonprofits like the ERT, the farmers market in the area, and more to come on that. There's almost more agenda items than there are time to have meetings. So, and then the last thing is encouraging and promoting voting and registering to vote throughout the neighborhood. And that's typically just through social media and getting people ready to honestly know when local elections are coming and who are the candidates and things like that. It's more of an educational thing than anything else. So I'm going to shift topics now to this topic of, if you can switch the slide, please. A business that Sam Woomer is here to talk about that he's starting in Chelsea. And so I'll let him do the talking, but here's a satellite image of the plot of land there just beside Torch is what I think most people know it as. And Sam, over to you.
How's it going? My name is Sam Woomer. I live in,
Speak up.
I actually live in Chelsea. I live in this house right here, 1306. And I work Dogtown's right here. This is its lot. I recently acquired this acclaimed events building in this grass lot.
Yeah.
So Dogtown is moving everything to the acclaimed events portion. And so yeah, we're super excited about that. But I had this big piece of grass and I've just been thinking about what to do with it. And I see all these MHI guys come and go to 7-Eleven and they sit in their cars and eat lunch, whatever. So talked to MHI and they're kind of on board with a food truck lot where 2 food trucks can come and park on this property with a couple benches or picnic tables, and they can have lunch there. It's really simple. It's going to be from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., 2 hours is when their lunch break is. And this corner here will have an L-shaped concrete pad where the food truck will park because they need a improved surface to park on. And the rest will just stay green with a picnic table and maybe a flatbed trailer for kids to climb on if we ever do a food truck on a Friday night or something like that. But yeah, the city approved the zoning, everything's permitted by right. And I really just came today to get any comments or questions. As a business owner, I'm going to put in minimal upfront capital into this because I don't know if it's going to work or if these shipyard guys are going to be buying $12 burritos from California Burrito. But I'm going to improve the concrete. I'm going to have nice picnic tables with umbrellas and keep it very simple and just see if we can kind of get something going for the shipyard guys. I'll have trash receptacles, cigarette receptacles, and I'll take care of all of that trash removal and any marketing for the food trucks. But yeah, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., 2 hours, really short, simple, sweet. That's it, really. I just wanted to open up the floor and talk. The paddock comes from, I'm from Kentucky, so that's where horses roam.
I think the first question was back here. Do you have a question?
I did. How will that impede with traffic during those busy hours?
I think everything's foot traffic. I don't think.
Definitely within easy walking distance of MHI. That is.
Yeah, I'm just hoping this is my demographic here. Everyone just walks here and litters to 7-Eleven and then.
I just mean with your parking, like
With-
where the trucks are parked, is that going to impede on traffic or?
So no, I'm gonna. I cut this tree down. This tree has already been removed, and I plan on probably planting a couple more. I planted jasmine along here just to keep some greenery, but the trucks will back in, unhitch, and then they can park in my parking lot.
Okay, cool.
I think you had a question.
I just, how is Torch and Grandy Flora, what's their take on that?
I talked to Torch, and they're okay with it. Grandiflora is all for it. Torch is more like it's 11 to 1, and it's just bringing more options to the area. And, it's we had a conversation about it. They didn't, they didn't burn up in arms. But. And if it's raining or, it's not gonna happen. So it is weather dependent and everything. I just think it might be a good fit for the area for the shipyard guys.
So, but is it really gonna be expensive?
It's whatever the food truck charges.
Okay. Because, most of the things that come to shipyards are cheap sandwiches and whatever.
Yeah, and so the MHI's actually really reach out to me
Okay.
because they have these guys coming in the minivans and selling stuff out of the trucks, and they're not with the health department, and the health department's all for it. They're excited about it. They block the entrance, they get in the way, the food trucks come and park illegally, and they're trying to push them out and say, hey, there's a new food truck lot, sign up, you pay your deposit, you pick your day, you come and sell your food. And I will require a health department license, just so everyone's verified.
Sure.
You mentioned Floyd, Callaway High. You mentioned you don't know how many of those guys are gonna get $12 burritos and stuff. Have a cap on what, like a tapas menu, like $5 for anyway. But just a suggestion, sorry.
So I 100% agree. The menu should be super cheap, super easy. And I think the food trucks will figure that out on their own. And I just will charge the rate, daily rate at park. That's it.
Kate from chat is asking if that space will be available for community use outside of those hours.
So in an ideal world, we have Saturday 12 to 8, Sunday 12 to 8, and you have a food truck come, and I have a flatbed trailer that's 8x5 for kids to climb on, and you have a fire pit, and you throw some marshmallows. So I'm all for it. I just, we'll figure it out as it goes. I haven't really got that far. I'm more focused on that 11 to 1. And if it's a nice space that people want to use, and if Torch people want to go over and let their kids climb on the flatbed, I'm all for it.
So it's just gonna be Monday through Friday, or?
Yeah, that's how I'm gonna start, Monday through Friday, 11 to 1.
We're huge fans of Dog Now, Jody, Harry Goldman, love coming here. You are really solid, so I know that you're successful. We have to get in advance. Is this an interim plan, Sam? You don't disclose anything on the board, but is this a temporary thing? Dog Now's going to expand, or what?
So this is already under construction. It won't be opening in September. So everything will move over. And this space will just be still empty. We have enough space on this property here for the dogs. So this is here to stay. And I'd like to keep it green and very open and welcoming, and no big construction, just a couple picnic tables and a flat bed.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay, so we're going to shift topics here over to Delegate Glass. So just a quick introduction. She was just elected in a special election in January of last year. She's native of Chicago. And from 2002 to 2013, she was in the Navy as a cryptologist, and went to college, Southern Illinois University, and moved to Norfolk. But I will say, for those of you that are fans of the Civic League, she was a former president of the Ballantyne Civic League, and she is associated with the Reach Reading program over there at Military Circle Mall, or formerly of Military Circle Mall, I'm not sure which. And for this topic that we're finishing up with today, she is on the board at the Norfolk Preservation Collective, which promotes and advocates for historic preservation within the city. And so she's going to give us an update on what's going on up in Richmond.
Yes.
Come on over here.
I'm gonna grab my water too. Because we are still in session right now, and I'll try to speak up. I heard you tell me speak up so the people over there
They
can
can
hear.
hear you good from here. You will.
I'll stay right here then. We are still in session. We are in a special session right now, so I have got budget on my brain.
very heavily, as last night we just received the governor's amendments from when we went up on June 1st. But before I go into budget, right, I'll give you guys sort of a capture of what our office is about, how we can be of service, how we plan to be of service, and then kind of talk about where we are legislatively, if that works. Right, so as I introduce myself, I am Jackie Glass-Obama, maybe that I claim myself as a certified doer, and I'm sure there's some certified doers in this room too, and I'm your laced up legislator. You will always see me in speakers because I'm always ready to go. Our office is fundamentally built on 4 principles, right? I believe in starting, when I started this journey back in January, and we knew 12 hours, 8 hours later that we were going to Richmond, I felt like it was really important to be grounded in something. And what we grounded ourselves is we will always be on the journey of educating, advocating, celebrating, and legislating. But we fully recognize that there is no way to do that legislation piece well if we don't have an educated electorate that's able to advocate alongside with us, and then be able to celebrate the victories that we have, however small or fleeting they are. So as we went up there, I personally put in only 5 pieces of legislation because that's all I could do. But I will tell you, a part of our mission here is we have a huge agenda for public safety. And many of the bills that we put in were revolved around allowing communities to grow and flourish and people to feel safe, but also being able to define that, because I know respectively, as I look at different communities, that definition changes what safe feels like. Can you hear me?
Very well. It's hard to hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, is that better? I'm kind of shy. Okay, it's okay. But we're trying to hold in our hands communities wanting to feel safe while understanding that we are deprived with our ability to do that, and still giving people space to do the right thing in between. So that's both in the community and in those forces that we're asking to help us feel safe. The major piece of legislation that I'm really, really, really proud of that we got through in Richmond was a forfeited assets bill, where we, just a man on the street across the street from Booker T. Washington High School, went up to one of our legislative folks and said, well, how come we can't use some of that drug money to do good stuff in our communities? That's a good question. How come we can't use some of those forfeited assets? Now, that forfeited assets is a whole nother conversation that we need to have about how we do it, but we expanded that definition to allow police departments who are asking the same question. You know, we get these assets and all we can do is spend it on new guns or new bulletproof vests or training. And why can't we put some of that money to invest back into some of these communities? We expanded that definition really high. And I'll sort of shift. We do a huge overview. I have like a 30-minute overview of the entire session, both the work that we did within those couple weeks and the work that we did that as a whole, the General Assembly did. And I think our next one, I'm looking back at my chief of staff, will be at Freemason Church. We're just waiting on a day, right? So into July. So what is really important to us is that we have touch points. There are several things that we do. I sent out a letter to the majority of my residents that were in senior housing, or for the vast majority of those that are over the age of 65, because we're trying to work and do this job with 5 generations coming at us, right? We do Facebook Lives every single morning at 6:30. Excuse me, every morning. I'd be killing myself. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 in the morning. That's our way to do social media. I have vowed to always, every month, we will be doing a town hall somewhere in the district, recognizing that I'm not going to be invited to every civic league or have the bandwidth in a year's time frame to get to every single city, but we will have those touch points. So I say to you all, that's our invitation in. Because we're going to try to be in the streets as much as we can. Over 80% of the job that I do is done in district. I spend a finite amount of time up in Richmond. So I think it's important to have those things there. So coming to tomorrow. Tomorrow is, I'm going to take a sip if that's okay. Tomorrow we'll be up in Richmond voting on these amendments. What you all saw for us that really has been helpful for the city of Norfolk is we did get $1 million carve out for violence prevention. Right? That is a beautiful thing. Strategically, we've worked really hard to build relationships with those folks on the executive level that are directly aligned with some of the issues and concerns we have here. And we brought down the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security to talk to our city leadership and to talk to organizations to really get them to see what it is Norfolk is and how we needed that extra support, and I guess they heard us. So we've got a little bit of money in our pockets. Is it enough? No, it's enough for an opportunity. It's not enough to solve a problem, but we're still gonna keep taking those steps. We got $0. We got $0.00 for to support the new flood project, but that is something that we again will strategically make relationships to get people to really understand our story, because I think that's what happens up in Richmond. It's there is that partisan piece, but there's also that empathy piece of getting people to really understand what's happening in your district. So when you're asking, it's from a place of knowledge, right? And that we can have empathy for what each other has going on in the districts and get people to buy in to that. When I say no for bills, we genuinely do. We're not asking for giggles. So tomorrow, some of the important things that we have on the budget. There is an expansion of reading specialists for schools with for schools that have scored on the lower end of SOLs for third grade reading. That's a beautiful thing because we relate third grade reading to crime statistics, right? Third grade reading level is what folks often use to determine how many beds they'll need in a jail, right? So yes, that's real. And so looking at that number and seeing that more money is going to be invested into that is an absolutely beautiful thing. Goodness, I tell you, I just read all this stuff just came out last night. But what I will do is that there's an abundant amount of things. I will make sure, and like I said, we're down to do a little gap, get on the phone so that we'll be able to send you guys a comprehensive overview of what we're doing, what matters most. But I do want to make sure that I leave space for questions, comments, concerns before you guys get into like the heavy things. Oh, there was one question. Let me answer that one. I did receive a question about the red flag laws, and I can't remember, I didn't have a name on it, but the question about the red flag laws was, we saw that, is anybody not familiar with what a red flag law is? Okay, so the red flag law is pretty much saying that that our departments, our police departments can, for gun owners that have, that there's some, maybe it was a mental illness or it was a domestic, that they can confiscate guns, I think for up for 14 days in a household or for those sorts of reasons. Yes. So 2 years ago, the Commonwealth passed the red flag law, allowing that option for folks to be able to do that. Now, since then, I think over 200 guns across the Commonwealth have been held for one reason or another. And then this year, as we saw, again, it's different values, right? I say my friends, I don't know if I call them friends, but my colleagues across out, we just share different values. We have some similar things. So the value system over there is, hey, we can't have red flags because it's infringing upon people's Second Amendment rights. Value system over here says that there are instances where we need to make sure that folks that are on the verge of doing something that could be catastrophic to themselves or someone else have that space away from those opportunities to do that. We did vote on that, and we'll often see that we do a 52 to 47 vote. That means it was directly on party lines. So it was successful in the House, but not successful in the Senate. So we still have the red flag laws for whomever that was asking. What sort of steps are we going to take looking forward? What we did see was some money goes to some departments to help fund families directly dealing with gun violence. But the next step of the conversation, which I'm hoping we'll be able to start having when I go up tomorrow, is there is no reason that we should be sending our little citizens to school not feeling safe. There is no reason for a third grader to be contemplating what it looks like to be a hero in those sorts of situations. So what I'm hopeful is that we start really having conversations like that. Sorry, I'm worried about, my heart is outside of my chest for our little citizens on this. And what I'm hopeful that is that we'll be able to have those kinds of conversations. We just haven't gotten there yet. So I will open up for questions, comments, concerns. Yes, sir.
About the forfeiture of assets.
Yes.
What specifically can that money be used for? Are you thinking about public safety, or are you thinking about education? Like, what are some avenues that money, which I think great, maintenance money just sitting in a locked cage or an account. Awesome, let's use it. What can it do?
So what happens is, when I say forfeited assets, that's really like police confiscate cars or the various whatever that is, whatever they sell, that's forfeited assets. We have a problem with the way that works because oftentimes innocent folks get their things taken and never get it back. That's a whole deal that should not happen. But the Department of Criminal Justice Services, they actually receive all of that. They're the ones who allocate that. So it's the city of Norfolk and the city of Virginia Beach. And the FBI did a raid together and they worked cooperatively and there was some funds that came out of that. They determine who gets what percentages. So that's all mapped out, right? However, what you can do, what a department can do with that money is specifically outlined, like it's detailed. They can only do so many things, which is why all we did was expand that definition to give departments leeway to do some community investment or promote goodwill.
What does that mean?
Well, so that means that if they wanted to use some of that money to help the city build a basketball court, they could do that. That means if they wanted to do things outside of just or some of the community work that you see them doing here, that they would have some of those funds to be able to do that and not just only be able to use that forfeited asset money to buy vests or to
Police work,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
yes,
Who
because
decides how it gets used?
that is up to that department. It is definite,
Which department?
that respective police department.
The police department decides if they're gonna build a basketball court.
No, the police department decides if they want to partner to do those sorts of things. They decide if they want to use their forfeited assets to do like they have the ice cream truck in the community. That's promoting goodwill. So because some part of it is that money can be used to pay an informant, right? To be able to say, hey, this is happening in the community. It should also be able to use to do positive things that benefit the community at large. So I feel like you're getting at something very specific.
Well, like, are you communicating with the police department and are they on board with this? What are their ideas?
Oh, so what I've done, right, when I come up with a bill, what happens is I talk to the sheriff's departments, the state police, the lobbyists for each, not for respective police department. I ask, hey, how do you all feel like about this? And oftentimes some folks will say, Jackie, I don't like it. So like I had another bill where I said, hey, we don't want police forging documents, right? Because of the incident that we had in our area. That all we're asking is that police don't forge Department of Forensic documents, right? Because we want people to be able to believe it. Well, it's not.
No.
So what we did was we said, hey, but here's what happened, right? Many of those departments, just like in this community, just like with this bill, came together and we said, hey, that's a good idea. That's a line we need to draw in the sand. However, we don't think that you as the legislator should be doing that. So we come back and we're now having conversation about who draws that line. And so when I'm working with other departments or folks, it's typically their lobbyists. And I know that sounds like a bad word, but a lot of times lobbyists are honed in on legislation in a way that we can collectively sort of get a better understanding of where they're coming from with it, where I'm coming from with it, and get some synergy to make sure that it passes. So I don't get to direct departments what they do with their money, right? Nor does necessarily the DCJS, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, other than by definition, other than by laws or by policy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, surely it makes sense.
And I'll dig deeper with you. I feel like you and I can have, because I don't want to put these people through this, but I feel like that's something you're interested in. And I would love to have you come to our summer school for certified doers and help us work on our public policy, if that's something that you're interested in, because we are having summer school for certified doers to help you all understand the bill process, but also see how you could be, your idea may be something that we can bring into law, or maybe we need to pull it over to our council to see how that works, or maybe it's a program.
Maybe me ask a different question.
Yeah, can I give somebody else a chance first, if that's okay? Does anybody else have any questions? Sorry, okay, so go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, it's just about the red flag laws. And,
Yes.
They said there were 200 confiscations.
They're over it across the Commonwealth.
Across the Commonwealth, and I'm just curious about like, what were the commonalities and did they work?
So what I did not do was look at the commonalities between all of those. So like you had a city like Richmond who had 0 confiscations, where you had a city like Virginia Beach who had 38, right? So there were 5 cities that accounted for probably half of that 200, What they were for specifically, I have not personally dug in that deep in that, but I just know how many there were and what that looked like. Now you can talk to those cities, respectively and see how they felt like those situations worked out and what that looked like for whether it's for educational purposes or it's for legislative purposes. But no, I don't have an answer to that. But we can connect and figure out if you can find that out.
Yeah, I mean, I get why it would, it's of course, the objective,
Yeah.
of course. The reason why it's not a good idea is very valid. I mean, it's a slippery slope, and people's arguments against that are that anybody can just report you,
Yeah.
and then a state employee comes and confiscates your private property. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
So that's a very nuanced issue, and if it's being planned on expanded upon, needs to be done very carefully, I think. And very.
I'm sorry, what did you say, sir?
So difficult to enforce.
Difficult, not impossible, but as I said to you before, what I said to you before, and what I'll say to all of you is that we are trying to do this work oftentimes with different values, right? But I think when it comes down to the kind of work that I want to do for you all as a legislator, there are some commonalities on the ground. And so where we may differ fundamentally on some of those things, I think that there's an empathy muscle that I can work from hearing you out, and an empathy muscle you can work from me hearing out, and then we get to a place where the least harm, right? That work, we'll always do that. At least that is me doing my best, and that changes every single day.
Any other
Sorry.
questions?
I didn't know.
No. So. I really appreciate you coming, especially given the fact that you're going to be shooting up to Richmond in the morning. I will say that when we reached out as a Civic League recently to discuss our concern related to the transportation and infrastructure down in Chelsea with the coming Fairwinds project, Stephanie here reached out immediately in response, very responsive, definitely here to listen to what the residents of the district what feedback they have. So I encourage you to reach out to Jackie to make sure that she's representing our interest in Richmond. So thank you for being here. So I'm going to shift topics here to the main topic for today. So I tried to introduce this topic in the newsletter here a few days ago. This is a topic that has been coming up several times throughout the course of the years, and that is, frankly, a lot of people are surprised that we're not some sort of the historic designation for West Ghent, and the truth is there's no historic designations for our neighborhood, though I think you'll hear from Paige and Susan that we certainly could meet the bill. So the inciting event was the fire over at the apartment building, and little did I know that Susan just gave me a call one day and said, hey, there's some interest from some folks in the neighborhood about starting a historic district. What do you think? And of course she knew that I didn't know the answer to that, but it was a way to start a conversation. And so I didn't know the first thing about it when she called probably 3-4 weeks ago. And her and Paige have been so kind to educate me. And then we had a board meeting where we discussed this recently, about 2 weeks ago, to discuss it further before we brought it to a resident meeting. So just to kind of set the stage for Paige and Susan, up here on the screen is a listing of all of the historic districts in the city of Norfolk today. The ones that are highlighted in bold are the ones that are designated local historic districts that are approved by city council. There's no way to become a local historic district without going through planning and council. That's the downtown district, Ghent, which Ghent meaning the Hague up to, I think it's Princess Anne, inclusive of that area. And there's a map here shortly. And then the West Freemason area. So I'm going to turn it over here to Paige and Susan here in a minute to kind of educate us on the topic as we embark on thinking about this. One thing that I want to drop as key takeaways here, right? In my mind, and I'm sure I see more growth here for me on this topic, the state and national designations versus the local are distinctly different things. And they're going to talk about that. The proposal is for a state/national historic district designation. And the points that I've taken away from my education up to this point is that it gives you access to historic tax credits to do preservation on your home if you so choose to use it. But at the same time, it imparts zero responsibility on anybody that lives in the district to do anything other than what they do right now, which is if you want to do a renovation and it requires to pull permits, you have to pull permits. If you want to paint your house pink, you can paint your house pink. There's no infringements on your property rights with this. It's mostly honorary is really what the designation is. And then based on introducing this topic, there has lately, I've been kind of following the conversation online on social media, and I want us to come away from this conversation, from my perspective, with an understanding of the difference between FEMA guidelines and the necessity to adhere to FEMA guidelines versus building codes and the necessity to follow the Virginia and Norfolk building codes. So pay attention to those parts if you could. Now, what are we deciding tonight, right? At the end, we're going to ask for a vote. We're not asking to whether or not we want to designate it a historic district or not. That is not what we're doing. That takes a process, and they're going to educate us a bit about the process. What we're asking is, are there enough interest from the Civic League and those interested tonight to embark on that process of figuring out whether or not we want to designate? And that is a months-long process. It involves door-to-door engagement with everybody within the designated area that we decide collectively, and it requires 50% plus one person of the neighborhood to agree. And that is the way that the state law is laid out. So I'm going to turn it over to Paige and Susan. So Paige is with the Commonwealth Preservation Group, which is located up on 35th Street. And then Susan is with the Planning Department. She's the head of the Historic Division of the Planning Department. So please welcome them.
Good evening, everybody. I brought a little handout, but I'm going to admit I do not have enough for this group. I underestimated how many folks would be here. So I'm going to ask God to pass these out, and then anyone who does not receive one, who would like one, my email address is at the end of the presentation. Also, you can go to our website and get my email address if that's easier, and I'm happy to send you the material. Or we're on 35th Street. You can stop by my office and say hello, and we can hand it to you that way. And I took a presentation that we typically give in the formal public engagement process for neighborhoods that have decided that they want to pursue designation. And I've kind of reformulated it for tonight to just give you guys an education, kind of a one-on-one, a 101 course on historic districts. And Susan and Sophia have seen this presentation before. I'm going to invite them to just chime in, keep it really informal, conversational. There may be questions that you ask that I say, just wait a moment, I'm going to get to it. But feel free to raise your hand and ask me as I go. I'm going to throw a lot your way and hopefully help you guys understand some of the nuances here. Next slide. So there are actually 3 different types of designation that you can seek in Virginia. The first one is National Register designation, and I'll talk about that in detail. The second one is state designation, and we'll get to that. Those often run in parallel. Those 2 are honorific. The National Register of Historic Places was established in 1966. It was established to create an inventory of our cultural, historic, and archaeological resources, educate the community about what they have, and really create a record and a way of honoring those historic resources. we'll get into the methodology and the factors that are taken into account to determine if something is eligible in a minute. But this as a recognition program has no impact on private property rights. Those of you who lived in West Ghent for a long time probably remember Taylor Elementary School, the original Taylor Elementary School. When I first came to Norfolk, it was the summer of 1999. And that was the time when Taylor Elementary School was being in the process of being evaluated for demolition because it was deemed unfit as a school and it was determined that it needed to be rebuilt. Taylor Elementary School was listed on the National Register of Historic Places at the time. And despite that, it was demolished. So it's a great illustration. I've used it across the Commonwealth of Virginia to say to people, truly and really, the National Register does not protect or infringe on property rights. That is good in the sense that you can do what you want, but it is bad in the sense that if folks assume a National Register property is protected and it's not, it sets in motion some unclear expectations. So it's very important to understand the National Register is not a regulatory tool at all. It is recognition. It is, however, necessary to gain access to federal historic tax credits. We can talk, I know there was a question about historic tax credits. We're going to talk about that later. It is also necessary to gain access to some of the flexibility that FEMA provides in recognition of the durability of historic materials in flood situations. And so there are special caveats for historic buildings that are recognized on the state and national register, just to give more flexibility in dealing with flood retrofits. It also does trigger a review process for federal undertakings. So for example, if VDOT wants to go through a neighborhood and it's designated on the National Register, VDOT has to evaluate the impact of that project on the historic character of the neighborhood. And if that project is going to have a negative effect, then there has to be mitigation or offsetting work. So there is an instrument to force a pause and mitigation for projects that involve federal undertakings. That's the term. And that term is very intentional to include federal permitting, federal funding, or any other federal involvement. Yeah.
If you think about, if you've been to Chesterfield Heights and there's federal funding involved down there, and you're familiar with the Brick Street down there, because that is a state national designated area, they actually would go in back at the Brick Street. They couldn't just come in with a asphalt street. So I know you have some brick streets around here. So it protects that. So you don't just get anything. So that's
Yeah.
the advantage.
And not to get too into the weeds on that, but if there is a project that involves a federal undertaking, and if there is required mitigation because that undertaking is going to have a negative effect, there is a mechanism for community engagement to allow the community to have a voice in what that mitigation might be and how it's executed. So it does enable some opportunities to be involved if there's something big coming to the area. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the Virginia Landmarks Register was established just a year before the National Register. In Virginia, we were kind of ahead of the game because in the context of the United States of America, we're, you know, an early colonial state. Really, it was designed and it mirrors the National Register of Historic Places. So much so that when my office is hired to pursue a National Register nomination, actually it flows through the Virginia Department of Historic Resources and it gets listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register on its way to the National Register of Historic Places, unless we request for that not to happen. That request can always be made. But the normal order of business is that something goes through and gets listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register and then the National Register. So the standards for evaluating whether something can be listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register are exactly the same. The documentation is exactly the same. We use the same form. The difference is that at the state level, there is a mandatory public meeting before the listing moves forward, where we talk about our findings and folks have an opportunity to ask questions, raise objections or concerns. There is also a very robust public engagement process leading up to that, starting at the beginning of the project and going all the way through to that public meeting at the end. And the purpose of that is to really educate the community, make sure we have a good understanding of the history and the cultural resources that we might not see in our survey, make sure that our research is well informed and takes into account any long-standing history that might come from residents of the community, and also to make sure that the community truly understands what this is and what it isn't. So that when we get to that final public meeting, really and truly, it's very rare to have any concerns or objections, because we've got an educated group who we wouldn't have executed all of this work unless they were supportive and behind it. So in mirroring the National Register, no impact on private property rights. The state of Virginia has a very generous state historic tax credit program, which we'll talk about at the end. That is a benefit, and it is necessary to be listed or eligible for listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register to access the Virginia Historic Tax Credit. And we find this to be an educational tool. Anyone who drives down East Virginia Beach Boulevard may or may not have seen this house before. This is a very important house. It's the Diggs residence. It was the purpose built and constructed by a gentleman who was instrumental in the civil rights movement in the city of Norfolk. Many of you have probably driven by that building many times, not even noticed it. So without this program and without this exercise of documentation, these are the kinds of resources we might lose. And these are the kinds of stories that the community might lose. This is why these registers exist. Next slide. So folks often conflate the local designation with the Virginia National Register designation. And I'm putting this map up here so that we can really talk about that. In addition to a whole bunch of individually listed buildings in Virginia that are on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register, there are all of these historic districts. To orient folks, this is Chesterfield Heights in downtown, the Auto Road Historic District, the Neon area, Ghent, North Ghent, Williamston Woodland, and Norfolk and Western Railroad, Park Place, Colonial Place, Riverview, Winona, Lafayette, Residence Park, Valentine Place, we're done. So you probably didn't realize we have that many state and National Register districts in our community, in addition to the Berkeley Historic District, which we're currently updating right now. Likewise, the military, as a federal agency, they have to deal with those mitigation requirements whenever they make changes. They have historic districts on base. So those of you who are in the Navy or who have friends in the Navy may not necessarily realize that either. Next slide. So let's talk about local districts. So this is where the protection comes into play. The Commonwealth of Virginia is a Dillon's Rule state. That means that localities can only engage in regulation that is enabled by the General Assembly. The enabling legislation for local historic district designation occurs in 15.2-2306. I put that up there because if you want to Google search it tonight and read the legislation, you can. It's pretty succinct. It's like a long paragraph. That basically says that localities can choose to identify significant historic areas and implement an overlay zoning through a change to the zoning ordinance. that is adopted by Planning Commission and then City Council. In Norfolk, and I should back up, I came to Norfolk to be the preservation planner for the city in 1999. And I was in that position for 2 years. And as far as I'm aware, since then, the policy of the city of Norfolk, which Susan can verify or tell me I'm wrong, is that the city is not interested in regulating local districts unless there is strong community interest in having that protective layer. Because that regulatory process is very labor intensive and really requires strong commitment by the community to manage and enforce. So they don't adopt local historic district designations unless it's initiated at the neighborhood level. And so when you look at the map that I just showed you a minute ago with all of those state and national register designations, and then you look at this map of the local designations, you'll see there's a stark contrast. So there are, I listed them here because it's a little bit difficult to see, but the locally designated historic districts in Norfolk include downtown, West Freemason, East Freemason, which is kind of the backside of MacArthur Mall. And that was really done to regulate scale and massing of some of the new construction buildings that were being built right around Freemason and St. Paul's churches. Ghent, which you guys are all familiar with. And then the Hodges House, which is a single property located on the south side of town. And then there is the Norfolk and Western Overlay District, which is where, sort of the north side of the railroad tracks. There is an opt-in district. So people can choose to opt into a local overlay in exchange for kind of some zoning concessions, basically. That is a little bit of a different animal. So I didn't put it on the map because it's really a parcel by parcel opt-in. But that is the universe of locally designated districts in Norfolk. Those districts are regulated, and changes to the exterior of those properties do go through the Architectural Review Board, and they are required to follow the design guidelines that the city has. But there is no direct correlation or association between what is listed on the state and national register in Norfolk leading to a local designation. That local designation process really is if the neighborhood chooses to pursue that layer of protection. Often that comes out of concern if there's development pressure or inappropriate types of development that the neighborhood wants to try and kind of contain. Okay, next slide. So this is just a brief summary. Like I said, this is a 101 course. I'm happy to take you guys to graduate school if you have more questions in the future. But, I thought I'd keep it simple. So the local designation, the benefits of that are really, it is the protection. The state and national register provides zero protection. The local can be more fine-tuned because the designation can be based on local priorities and local criteria. The state and national register criteria are based on national standards. We'll get into those in a minute. And then the local does not always come with incentives. Sometimes there are incentives. The Norfolk and Western Railroad overlay, that the entire reason for that was to create some incentives. Whereas the Virginia Landmarks Register and National Register have the opportunity for tax credits, as Scott said, if you choose to take advantage of that opportunity. Next slide. So we're talking about the Virginia Landmarks and the National Register of Historic Places. The conversation in this community has percolated over the years. I've been asked at least 6 times to look at whether this could become a historic district to be listed on the state and national register. In each instance, that request has come out of a property owner, whether an individual residential property owner or a multifamily property owner, duplex, whatever, all different types of property owners who were looking at major renovations of their property and hoping that they could take advantage of the historic tax credits. Obviously. And I've had to tell them every time, West Ghent could be a district, but it's not one. So you can't take advantage of the credits. but go talk to your neighbors and see if this is something that folks want to pursue. And so I guess at this point, there's enough interest and enough discussion in the community that the Civic League wanted us to come and we to kind of talk about the process. So that's what we're focused on. We're not talking about local designation. I don't think Susan's heard any interest in that. I've never heard any interest in that. State national, that's what we're focused on. Next slide. So what does it take to be eligible to be a state national register district? There are basically two primary questions that need to be addressed in a nomination form. Does it have integrity and does it have significance? Integrity is looking at the architectural and building material fabric, the streetscape, the street patterns, the character, the feeling of the district, the association. Significance is looking at what happened there, where there are important architects who designed the buildings there, where there are important events that happened in the area. So it's looking at more of the cultural identity or the history of the area. Does the property have integrity? Is it significant? Those two questions are evaluated through a two-step process. The first step is called a preliminary information form. That's a generalized history and a generalized architectural description with limited mapping and photography to give the state an opportunity to just take kind of like a first pass look. And they're really telling us, if you were to pursue a formal nomination with all of the required documentation, is this a neighborhood that would succeed and get listed? That's the purpose of a preliminary information form. It's non-binding, but it's a good tool to kind of vet out what is worthy of pursuing nomination one. I put these two images because I thought you'd be familiar with both of them. This is now called the Roebuck building, and this is where Commune is. They both look like brick warehouses, right? They both have steel windows. So we first looked at the Texaco headquarters probably 15 years ago. And because of a lack of integrity, because of alterations on the interior, that building was not individually eligible for the registers. But it sat within a neighborhood of similarly aged buildings that all related to the auto history of Norfolk. That was the part of town where the auto showrooms were. In this building, I'm not kidding you, there are pictures in the interior that showed you could drive your car in, go up to a gas pump inside the first floor, have your car filled up and come out. So this whole part of Norfolk was an auto-related area. So we nominated the neighborhood as the Auto Row Historic District, really celebrated that history.
What, tell me that address, though, I'm confused.
It's like 759 Granby Street, 765.
Okay.
It's at Olney and Granby.
Got it.
That renovation received historic tax credits. The Atlantic Permit nearby did. Duke Grace building, the high rise that's being renovated right now, received historic tax credits. So many of the projects that then came along in that part of town benefited from the tax credits. Yeah.
No, I'm so sorry to interrupt, because I have to run. I just wanted to ask one question. I know the theme of not infringing on property rights has come up several times in the presentation. Sandwiching that with the tax credit. So if you were to have national designation, I assume the tax credit would only be applicable if you wanted to improve your property in a way that is conditional with historic guidelines.
Yes.
So if you were to get national designation and you were not applying for credit, if I wanted to replace my roof and I'm not interested in a tax credit, is it going to be incumbent for me to seek historic preservation guidelines, go with certain builders? So I could go with Joe's roof replacement, use the materials that I want if I'm not pursuing a tax credit.
Yeah, and that's why I use that extreme example of the school. It was on the register and it got demolished.
Right.
So it's not just that you don't have to worry about your roof replacement. You can do whatever you want to do on your property. You have to follow the building code that the state has. You have to get a building permit just like you would not being on the registers, but there is no change in your obligations as a property owner maintaining your property. Zero.
I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's a great question. I put these two up because this building, which is the Roebuck, is individually listed on the registers. They look very similar, but here's the difference. This building is the last surviving resource of its type in an area where there were many, many of those buildings. It's indicative of the history of Norfolk and the waterfront, a warehouse use that existed historically. So you may have similar buildings, but for various reasons, one might be eligible for the registers individually and one might not. And in the case of this area, any building probably in all of West Ghent wouldn't be individually eligible because it sits in a surrounding of an entire historic neighborhood. So the state would have a really hard time considering one building to be distinct and elevated to a level of individual eligibility above the others. Next slide. Yes.
You said that the top one, the top building was not historically labeled, but they did get the tax credits.
So the top building had to be put into a historic district.
Okay.
And it is considered contributing to that district because it's historic and it retains enough character to contribute. But it could not be listed individually by itself.
And it could not be listed individually because there had been enough changes to the building.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it had actually a high level of significance, but it had lost integrity.
Okay. And when that happens, it's now part of the district, right?
Right.
So now it's by proxy considered a historic site.
Yes.
And it's protected from certain regulations. Is that right?
It is a state and national registered district, and that building contributes to the district, and that property owner can do whatever they want to that building.
And is the standard different because it's an old building than it would be considering codes? I'm just wondering what you mean by regulations.
So if you are in a locally designated district, like Ghent, or like Freemason, when you want to make a change to the exterior of your property, there are a series of guidelines that are written to help protect the historic character of the district. And so you have to follow those guidelines and go through the architectural review board to get approval of the work that you want to do because you're in a local district and you have that layer of protection. Many people are concerned about that. Personally, I actually really appreciate, because I love, I'm a historic preservationist, I appreciate that regulation for my own house. And the reason is because I know then my neighbors are going to be held to a standard.
This is about aesthetic.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
and integrity.
I'm more concerned about safety and regulations of older buildings in the area that don't have central air, that don't have water sprinklers, that don't supply fire extinguishers or carbon monoxide detectors, or have commercial grade fire alarm detection in the buildings that have fire escapes that are falling apart. This is something that is common in the area, and they follow different rules because they are old buildings. And I'm wondering if that's just a scapegoat to become a part of the thing that, that's my concern. Is that
so just the building code allows the building code official leeway in interpreting the minimum requirements of the building code as long as that leeway does not affect life safety. Okay, so for example, if someone went in to do to get a building permit on a major building renovation, and let's say the existing main staircase in the building didn't meet the current building code's requirement for the rise and the run, like on the interior, that staircase. The building code official would not force them to take that staircase out and rebuild it. Oftentimes there's not even enough space to do that, right? But if, let's say, the building had enough units that in the current code, it would require fire suppression system, but it currently doesn't have one. The building code official would require installation of a code compliant fire suppression system because that is a life safety matter. Now, a benefit of having a historic designation is that that property owner has access to historic tax credits, and those tax credits offset the cost of all of those improvements.
But that's up to the landlord.
If-
not
if
to
the-
city to mandate. that
Correct.
Every building be upgraded.
Correct.
I think that's the problem, and I'm wondering.
And the city
where
doesn't
can there be
really-
a balance or a communication between the city and landlords and raising the standard of safety and quality of living for everyone,
So
whether they live in a new building or old building.
So a recommendation that this is a little bit off track, but I'm gonna make a quick recommendation and then we can kind of talk offline.
Sure.
My office is located in the Park Place. We are very active in the Park Place Civic League and in the Park Place Business Associations. And I can tell you in Park Place, one of the things that they dealt with, one of the ways that they've dealt with concerns about what are hazardous conditions or potentially hazardous conditions is to kind of build that relationship with the fire marshal and various folks within the city to make sure that there's someone that they can go to that they're familiar with. So we can sort of talk about that offline, but that's a bit unrelated and
No,
Yeah.
so that doesn't play, it's not a factor. They're not
Yeah.
exempt from those things if they.
no,
become
not at all.
So
Paige,
the
can I
tax-
just jump in for 1 minute on one comment about that? Whether you're in any historic district, the city does not impose that you make any changes. We only respond to the changes that you're making. Ordinary maintenance is fine. We don't regulate any of that. And so a lot of what you're commenting on might fall under property maintenance. So we are not heavy-handed on just because you're historic versus not historic. So please, do not worry.
So if you do $100,000 worth of work on the property, you get $100,000 worth of tax credits?
We're gonna get to tax credits towards the end, but the quick
How much
answer.
how much can you sell those tax credits for?
So if it's your house, it's your residence, and you spend $100,000 on a renovation, you get a $25,000 tax credit. If it's your personal residence, your mortgage company is probably not gonna let you execute the legal maneuvering that you would need to sell those credits. So you would use those credits in lieu of paying income tax to the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You spread that over several years?
You have up to 10 years. You can use them as quickly as you're able to, but you have up to 10 years. So I'm gonna try and keep moving because I know it's getting late.
Just clarify one thing.
Yeah.
You said the local storage designation and the state designation are different, correct?
Yes.
The gentleman that was sitting in front of me asked a question that as long as you weren't using a tax credit, then you could use whatever company you wanted to do whatever you wanted to do your house. However, you said several times since that if you were going to do something, it would have to go in front of the architectural review board. So I guess my question is, if you're not using a tax credit,
I
and you do whatever you want,
I think he said a store.
I mean, I think you said state, he was talking about state, and it's the local one that's where the. But I'm still,
So,
I'm
someone
still
ever-
confused about.
Under-
which-
Someone over here asked
Which
me
one
about,
we're doing and how does it affect you when you want to do something to your house? I mean, I've called several contractors recently, and the first question they ask me is, are you in a historic district? Because if you're in a historic district, I don't want to work on your house.
So
I think question
there's-
is,
there's no interface at the state or local level like there would be no interface with anybody in this neighborhood with the Norfolk Architectural Review Board. There would
That's
be,
the question I'm looking for.
yeah, there would be zero interaction between, if you wanted to do something on your house and an architectural review board, because we're not currently, unless I'm missing something from the audience, we're not pursuing a local designation. So that architectural review board is solely a function of the local districts
okay.
in Norfolk.
and
So
then-
really all you're doing is applying for a building permit, just like you would today, right?
That's not what the civic league doesn't want to do local, it wants to do state.
Well, I'm only, so the Civic League board educated ourselves and decided whether or not we thought it was worthy to take the proposal that an owner in the neighborhood brought to the Civic League and take it to the residents. And then, so if the neighborhood wants to pursue a local designation, so that's what I'm saying. I'm not weighing in.
Who's the owner? Is the owner here?
Is the owner of this building gonna pay for this application?
And is the owner here?
He's not here.
No, they're not here.
Not here.
They're not
Then
here.
why are we talking about this?
I feel bad. This woman's trying to get through this.
Yeah.
I do get what you're asking. I do have a house in Old Town Portsmouth, and I will tell you down there, if we put in stairs, and they tell you, oh, no, that doesn't look historic. You get to repay and do that. I don't think they're saying they're doing that. It's different.
That's the local. And I have mentioned local tonight because I'm trying to draw a contract.
Right.
We're talking state and national register. You guys have probably heard about local districts though, because there's one in Ghent and there's one in Freemason.
Okay, I was just.
Different, yeah.
But who is the person that brought this to the city? And where is
It
he?
has been- I can't answer that because I'm here to.
You're here, where is he? He or she, I don't know who Egg Properties is.
So
I don't know, where is he or she that made this part of this meeting? I don't understand.
Actually, I contacted your Civic League president, Susan McBride, with the city.
You're fine.
And my colleague Sophia Lass, who works with me in historic preservation, because I was contacted by a few different people, just we're in the process of the city-wide resurvey. So it wasn't one person.
Well, that's not the way.
The email made it sound like, is this?
It's
property?
Egg Properties.
Property because of FEMA's
hold on a second. So I wrote the email, okay? So if we wanna, like, I'm the one that framed the message from myself in the newsletter, right? If I mischaracterized, so I became aware.
Why isn't he here?
Why is he not here?
Yeah.
Him and I have.
Does he not live here? Is he
I
not
don't
a
know.
local?
I don't know precisely where he lives, but so if you could let me answer. real quick,
Absolutely.
okay? So Hague Properties, Chris McCoy is the owner of the company, right? We've spoken on the phone 3 times now since about a month and a half ago or something.
He contacted you after I.
Yeah, she asked if he could contact me. I was like, yes, absolutely, absolutely, he can contact me. I'm the Civic League for the neighborhood that he owns a building. Absolutely, right? And she said that, hey, this person reached out and said, is it an historic? Can I designate my building as a historic building? Can I do all that? Right? He went through, from my understanding, weeks and weeks of trying to establish either his particular building, his 2 buildings that are right next door to each other, or a tiny little plot of, down near Greenway Court and the buildings around it. And there are barriers to getting that listed, which she just described. I think the
It's an
technical.
integrity issue.
It's an integrity issue,
1000%.
right? But Susan said, hey, listen, like, and I believe you said it, I believe I've been reached out to a dozen times
Yes.
from various property owners in West Ghent asking to pursue it. And I was like, look, Susan, I don't know the first thing about what you're talking about. And so she gave me a quick education, which was fantastic, on the phone. And she suggested that I reach out to Paige, right? And
I also said, we would never move forward. The city does not initiate these things. It comes from the Civic League. Talk to your
Right.
Civic League and the residents.
And so I'm just serving.
Messenger.
We took it to the board and the board was like, hey, look, everyone has various feelings about what happened with the Greenway Court building. And I fully acknowledge that.
It's what happened.
I'm sorry?
We don't still know really what happened.
Well, yeah, so that fully acknowledge what you're saying. But what I'm saying is in the process of learning about that and learning that there has been interest that has gone nowhere every time, we said, well, what is it? Like, what is it? What is the deal, right? What's the catch, right, of doing this? And my personal opinion, having been educated on this, is that I haven't caught the catch yet. And the way I look at it is, I think I'm going to make 2 points on this topic. One is it will encourage investment in the neighborhood. Because if you so choose to do a $100,000 renovation on your house and adhere to the national standards while you're doing it, and she's going to educate us on that a little bit, right? You can get $25,000 worth of tax credits from the state to offset it. So a $100,000 renovation turns into a $75,000 renovation. There's some accounting in there, but that's the simplest version of that, right? Also, Susan, I believe, or was it you, Paige? You know, there are these companies that Hague Properties owns properties in The Hague. It owns it in West Ghent and I believe a few other areas downtown, right? If you look anecdotally where these companies are, Cavalier Land is another big owner in West Ghent, right? If you look at where they're doing their capital investments, they're doing more of their capital investing in the districts that have a historic tax credit.
What investments are they doing? They already.
I think the thing that's going on, I apologize for the emotion of it, right? I think what's going on over here with us on it is that, you know, obviously I was in the firm. What we're asking, we saw these old buildings are built to floor. And I think the biggest thing we're trying to say right now is, I'm hearing all this stuff coming in. I think what we're worried about is it seems like somebody's trying to get away with making a buck, as opposed to actually making people safe.
And that was absolutely my first, second, third, and fourth. That was my first, second, third, and fourth impression, right? Because I'm a skeptic by nature to start with, and I was like, okay, what is the deal here, right? And I can't figure out what the. So I mean, and I'm not going to speak for Chris or Hague Properties, but I have spoken with him, right? And so to get to why he's not here tonight,
Why is he here?
he was going to be here tonight, and we had a conversation, him and I, about, look, like, we don't want to turn this into a referendum on you as a landlord, right? Because that is not.
But he wants us.
That's why we're doing this.
Yeah, he's, despite what she said, and I understand other people may have said something from the neighborhood. But your email made it seem like he's the one that started this process for us, which is why we're all here. I haven't been to a Civic League meeting except for the chaos of Fairwinds, which is another nightmare. But I would not be here but for that, and I live right down the street.
Yeah.
Right.
So I would say that that's a fair statement, that we would not be talking about this tonight if he didn't bring it up.
Exactly. And so why isn't he here to explain to us why he needs it? Does he not have the money? He owns all this property around the city. What the heck? He's got insurance money.
Could I just add something? I'm here just because I love Norfolk and I've lived in Norfolk a long time. I'm not working for
I'm
anyone.
born and raised here, so don't
yeah.
start with me.
I'm not starting anything. What I'm trying to say is the decision to move forward with the district or not should have no bearing on any individual property. That conversation really needs to be a conversation and a desire that comes out of the neighborhood. And it's unfortunate what got us here today, but my hope in being here and just giving the information is that you guys will walk away with the tools you need to make a decision as a neighborhood in the best interest of the neighborhood.
I appreciate it.
So.
No, I understand all this. This is great.
It is unfortunate, but
I was just saying, I can see some lovely things about it, some positives, but what really concerns me is the potential for exemptions from FEMA regulations. So I understand that's not going to.
She's going to go.
And that's where I would really like to understand.
I think that's
think that's
really
a
an
flower
important
too.
thing for this area.
Yeah.
So let's move forward. I think I'm gonna skip a few slides. These folks have the slideshow, so.
It's
feel
going to
free
be up on the website here tonight.
So we go through, we survey every resource, document the resources. Next slide. These are the evaluation criteria, so history, association with significant person, architecture, that's the most common area of significance, or archaeology. Unlikely we would do archaeology here, but there's probably a lot of really cool archaeology in the neighborhood. Next slide. So just again, this is the impact. Next slide. Tax credits, we talked about this briefly. State tax credits available to any contributing resource, whether it's income producing or not. 25% credit against the soft and hard costs associated with the renovation. I can give anyone more information on that. Just call me at the office.
Hey, can I jump in?
Yeah.
I also want to mention the city of Norfolk, whether you're designated or not, has a tax abatement program because the city wants you to invest in existing structures. So they will fully, it's a tax abatement program for 15 years and they'll fully abate for the first 10. It's transferable once and it works really well with this program. And I'll bet there are people in this room who use this together quite frequently. So that it's a real plus. So it's through the assessor's office and that's another benefit. You can abate your taxes on a big improvement on your house.
And the graphic is just, a lot of folks ask, why would the state give a tax credit? And the economic analysis, every single time they do it, is that the return is greater than the lost tax revenue. So that's just kind of a short graphic to demonstrate that. Next slide. The federal credit, I summarized the state credit, any contributing building, whether it's owner occupied or not, income producing or not, 25% credit, relates to all soft and hard costs, capital improvements associated with the building renovation. So that includes plumbing and electrical and mechanical upgrades, fire suppression upgrades, paint, refinishing floors, labor, all of those costs, architectural fees, if you're doing a renovation that involves design work, all of this. The federal credit is for income producing property only. It's a 20% credit. If you have an income producing property, you can benefit from both credits, get a 45% credit. This is the engine that has really helped to revitalize much of the Otter Grove Historic District, Williamston Woodland, where O'Connor Brewery, Toast, all of those buildings are located, downtown Norfolk. It's been heavily used in Ghent. We have done a historic tax credit project in, I believe, every single neighborhood that is listed on the state national registers in the city of Virginia, at least one, every neighborhood. So it is used by both homeowners as well as commercial property. Next slide. This is just a summary of what qualifies. It's gonna be on your website, so I'll let you guys look at that in detail. Next slide. Flood mitigation. This, I think, is a really important question, and this is really emerging and new information. Okay, I'm going to try and give a succinct summary. If you guys want me to tell you more, happy to do it. 2015, the building code was updated to say that any property in a special flood hazard area, which is a flood classification that is common in the city of Norfolk, that requires investment of over 50%, is considered substantial rehabilitation. And that 50% marker triggers full compliance with FEMA's flood mitigation requirements, okay? FEMA has 5 options: flood vents, demolition, elevation, elevate mechanical equipment, fill the basement. Those are the 5 options. Yes. If you can't come into compliance with those 5 options and your investment that you need to make is more than 50% of the value of the property, you're out of luck. A great example of that is in Lock Haven. A family had a fire. It was a dryer fire in their laundry room. But it caused a lot of, confined to the laundry room, caused a lot of smoke damage. That smoke damage resulted in them triggering the 50% rule. They had to demolish their house and build new because they couldn't get a building permit otherwise. They were not located in a state and national register historic district. And based, I've been here since 1999. Historic districts have come along over time. I think this change in the building code and the resulting unintended consequences are going to drive and accelerate the use of historic district designation to open up options for alternative ways to minimize risk. And when I say that, here is an example. So if you're, FEMA recognizes, and in their literature, they say historic building materials are inherently more resilient. We don't have empirical data to show that, but we know it to be true. And they kind of open the door for exploring that, okay? They also say, in recognition of the historic nature of these buildings, we will enable local governments to, and the state also enables local governments to provide an opportunity to request an exemption to the 5 FEMA options. That's not a free pass. It's not a get out of jail card. If you want to pursue an exemption, you have to fill out a very detailed application. You have to articulate why the FEMA alternatives won't work and what alternatives you're proposing that would be more effective, okay? I brought this as just one example. This building you guys might recognize, it was recently renovated. It's the home of the G Art Center on the 1st floor and apartments upstairs.
Is it called like the Standard or something?
The Atlantic Permanent.
The Atlantic Permanent.
It was historically a bank called the Atlantic Permanent. So it's mid-century modern. It is one of my favorite buildings in Norfolk, has been since I moved here. My husband thought I was crazy, but he's come around. So to comply with FEMA requirements, the architect would have had to certify and use their stamp, and that behind that is a code of ethics, and say, this building will withstand hydrostatic pressure to this height and be wet proofed for the safety of people inside. That is an impossible statement to certify, and it would be irresponsible for the architect to do that. And the architect recognized that. This was a tax credit project that my firm worked on with work program architects. The architect recognized that was not something that they should be doing. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. They could not be clear and know for certain what the structural integrity of that building would be with that much hydrostatic pressure. But that's what that code requirement was dictating.
Why?
Because they were triggering 50% improvement rule, and that's what FEMA says you have to do. So the exemption becomes our way of saying, this is irresponsible. We can find better ways to deal with this building. So what did we do? We looked at the existing building materials. It's masonry, it's tile, it's terrazzo. There's very little drywall. And we said, you know what, we can wet proof this building. We can make it so that if this building is in a substantial flood like that, we let the water in and then we clean it out. That itself is an exemption. Okay, so when people say they're concerned about exemptions, don't think of it as a get out of jail free card.
I want to step in just for a minute because the city takes flood requirements very seriously. City council has worked very hard to get Norfolk's participation in the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, legitimate, get our score down to keep your rates low. We get audited on every building permit. We are not looking to cut any corners because the building is historic. So to Paige's point, we're looking for the best solutions for the building. And so please know that this isn't a get out of jail free card at all. The city is not interested in losing their rating in the NFIP at the expense of residents.
Also,
Some residents, certain residents, like it's not to, you're saying not damage the interest of everybody in the interest of a few.
correct.
Right, correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you're saying.
And also know that Susan's exactly right, and that's a really important point, but also when architectural drawings and engineering drawings are submitted for building permit review, that architect and that engineer are stamping and putting their liability insurance, their professional reputation, and their careers on the line, saying this is the best option. So there are a lot of layers of professional analysis that go into these exemptions. And if we aren't responsible in how we use them, that option is going to go away. So that is very much in the design and the architectural and the rehabilitation world, that is very heavy on our minds when we're looking at how we treat these historic buildings.
If may, this 50/50 rule, is it only apply for flood mitigation? Is that when that kicks in? FEMA goes, we have, designate this, and you have to, it's not that.
You have it, think about the dryer fire. He had a dryer fire. He's never had a flood insurance claim. He had a dryer fire. Caused smoke damage.
Right.
The cost of remediating that smoke damage was more than 50% of the assessed value of his house. Okay. So it's not direct, it's in the building code.
It's the building code. Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha.
FEMA enables the exemption, and so the Commonwealth of Virginia pulled that in when they adopted the building code. They pulled that exemption in, recognizing that there are circumstances like this where it would be irresponsible to force, in this case, this building, if we didn't have the exemption, it wouldn't have been rehabbed. It wouldn't have been.
Can I also jump in to Paige's earlier point about being the advantage being state, national, and I'll say local too, because this applies on the local level. But in a flood situation, say you have a repetitive flood loss, and you want to use FEMA dollars, and you're going to get elevated, for instance. There's a big difference on what that foundation is going to look like and the funding available for a building that's in a state, national, or local district versus ones that aren't, because FEMA's going to pay the bare minimum for that. But if you're in a designated district, sometimes you have a seamless look to an elevated building. And so the treatment is different. You got more consideration, there's more money available. They have to follow the section 106, they have to be reviewed. So.
Remember earlier I said if there's a federal undertaking, they have to take into account the historic resources and mitigate negative effects. A way of mitigating negative effects is, rather than having a concrete block foundation in an elevated property, you might have a brick skirt that fits in with the neighborhood better. So that's an example of a mitigation activity. So just to kind of close the loop on this, what we did with this building, we dry flood proof the critical elements. For example, the elevator shaft and the electrical room. So those are sealed with and encased, and they will stay dry. But the rest of the building, we wet proof the first floor, because from a safety standpoint, from a feasibility standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from the standpoint of feeling like it was the appropriate message to send to occupants in terms of, you need to get out of this building if we're having storm because it's going to get wet, versus you're going to be safe and dry. For all of those reasons, we needed that exception. And the outcome is, if anyone's been to the Arts Center, I think a fairly seamless outcome. Things that you didn't see, all of the electrical was elevated above design flood elevation for safety. The drywall below sort of chest height is all mold and mildew resistant drywall. There's a capillary break. So if we have a major flood, they go in with a utility knife, they cut that lower section out and replace it. So there are a lot of invisible strategies that we implemented as well. But I know as this exemption is used more and more, we're hearing more folks express legitimate concern. And if you don't pause and kind of listen to why and how it's used, that concern makes a lot of sense. But when you begin to apply it to specific buildings, it becomes clear that it's a necessary tool. So.
You have to like prove that too. Like your
So-
ideas that we're
works so well?
So we had to make an application to the floodplain manager of the city of Norfolk. And that application, I think, was 47 pages long.
Wow.
So
in-
it's very
In
thorough.
the case of our building, let's say it happens, West Ghent becomes a historic district, okay? Now they're protected from the FEMA regulations. And they don't have to fill the sand. Okay, fine. The FEMA regulation is there for a reason. Maybe the building's not sound, but now they're exempt from it. What
Well-
are they gonna have to come up with the ideas? Who are they gonna brainstorm with?
So-
And who's going to, and are they gonna have to, you know, the list, like, are they gonna have to put in commercial grade sprinkler? Are they gonna have to do all?
So that's a process question, and that's a great question. So the process, if you decide, you know, when we came to the conclusion we could not meet FEMA's requirements for this building, what do we have to do? There's a form. It's actually a form that the state developed and the city of Norfolk has adopted. It asks you for a whole bunch of information, a flood elevation certificate, a certificate from an engineer, architectural drawings. We had to write a detailed narrative analyzing each of FEMA's standard requirements and how those either failed to protect or were inappropriate or unachievable in the building. So that was a narrative. Then we had to include a narrative of what we were proposing as alternatives and how those alternatives would achieve a better outcome, or at least at minimum, kind of the same level of protection, or reduce risk for FEMA. FEMA's looking at it from the perspective of an insurer, how can I reduce risk? City's looking at it from a life safety perspective. We also had to include photography, cut sheets for every material we used, flood logs, the resilient wallboard, all of that stuff. Detailed drawings about how we were going to handle the dry proofing of those key elements that needed to remain dry. So that whole package went to the floodplain manager. They have to first determine, we had to prove that it was in a historic district as well. So all of those things. The first question, the floodplain manager says, is this building eligible for the exemption? The building. And if the answer is yes, then do I agree that this proposal has merit and it's a better outcome? Do I agree with the arguments that are being made about why the traditional options can't work? That is at the discretion of the floodplain manager. In my office as preservationists, we recommend, and the city, they're reviewing a draft of our guidelines. So I don't know whether they're going to agree, but we believe after the floodplain manager approves it for its technical merits, that application should also go to the architectural review board to make sure that the historic character is in fact being protected. Because at the point of that exemption is to do a better job with our historic resources, then someone's got to also say, yeah, we agree that this treatment is appropriate for the historic building. Don't know if the city's going to adopt that, but that's where we think it should go because we want to be responsible users of this tool.
So wait a second, say that if we get this district, the city will have to look at, if it's in a flood zone, then we'll have to go to the architectural review board.
So my office made a recommendation to the city that citywide, any exemption request, and remember, these are rare, but anyone who falls into that category, the example I gave, if they're going to say they're maintaining the historic character, someone needs to validate that. Somebody needs to validate that.
So we'll have to go to the architectural review board.
If you're looking for an exemption to the FEMA floodplain requirements, yes.
That's everybody in West Ghent.
But that's not what we're going for. That's not the designation that the neighborhood is going for.
No, that's not what she's saying, Vanessa.
Well, first of all, what
It's
she's
not what she's
proposing is a
saying.
policy proposal to the city. It is not currently the regulation that the city council
You
has
don't have a
adopted.
basement. I've got a basement. So, all right, whatever.
So,
So I've got a basement that sometimes gets water.
okay, so let's back up for a
Yeah, let's
second.
back up.
Folks are very concerned about a property on Greenway Court that had a major fire that's triggered this
And I'm a
exemption.
block away
Okay,
with a
so,
full basement that from time to time takes on water. So I'm now confused by your statement.
if you decided to undertake a renovation that would exceed 50% of the value of your home,
Okay,
you today would have to meet FEMA's full compliance. You would have no choice, or you would not get a building permit. If you found that to be unachievable,
I'm listening.
okay, if you found that to be unachievable, today, you would have no option. You just couldn't do your project.
Okay.
Okay. If you are in a historic, state and national register historic district,
Okay.
same circumstances, you want to do a renovation that exceeds 50% of the value of your home, and you find that the FEMA compliance is unachievable. You're in a state and national register district, you can decide you want to apply for an exemption. And you could go through that detailed documentation process of proving your case. Right now, the floodplain manager looks at that and says, I agree with the technical merits. And that's where it stops. But again, my office, private consultant, I work for myself, I don't have any power. I think we're saying it's a historic exemption. Someone, whether it's staff at the city who has experience with historic buildings, should be the final step to say, floodplain manager agrees with it, and we think it's appropriate for the building. I think that last step is an important step to lend credibility to the process. That step hasn't been adopted.
Understood.
But that's just a personal opinion. And again, it's because I know when we use this, I know how important it is. And I know that the property owners who need this have no options. So I'm sort of in a mode of being hyper responsible about how we use this.
So can I ask you a question, and correct me if I'm wrong in asking it again, because I think you asked a really good question, right? Which is, okay, I live 1224 Woodrow, right? My house is worth whatever the city says it's worth. I want to do a major reno. That reno is going to cost 51% of the current value of my home. I have to apply for a building permit. Part of that building permit process says, is your house compliant with current day FEMA regulations? And in hypothetical scenario, my answer is no. Right now, today, if I filed for that permit downtown and the answer is no, then I have to choose one of the 5 options that you talked about. Or I'm just out of luck.
You have to become fully compliant.
Right? And then, and if my house is considered contributing to, so right now, like that's kind of the end of the road. Like you have to come fully compliant, or you're not allowed to get a permit to do a reno.
Or you reduce the scope of your reno to get underneath that 50%. Right.
Okay. Alternate scenario, we live in a state or national historic district. Same process. If I want to do that, I can pursue the thing that you just described at length on how we get the exemption. But if to get the tax credit, my house has to be considered contributing to the historic district in order to apply, in order to get it, right? So if I live in a house that was built, 10 years ago and it's like modern, and it's not through this process that we go do, it's not contributing, I'm not eligible for tax credits.
Nor would you be eligible for the exemption
Right.
option.
Okay.
But it's more likely that if your house was built 10 years ago, that it's closer to FEMA compliant.
That's
and
true,
you would
yeah.
have a lower limit.
But it only matters if you're in the district or not. It doesn't matter the property. Like you can do whatever you want.
It's the FEMA exemption is for historic properties within the district.
So every house,
Every property is a historic property.
So
in
when
the
we
district, right?
when we skipped over the survey slide, but when you go from the first step, which is the kind of preliminary analysis, and you move into the second step, which is the big effort, we do a building by building survey to determine what is contributing to the district, meaning it was constructed within the historic period and still conveys that.
Yeah.
Visually. And then what is non-contributing, which would be modern, outside of the historic period that's recognized, or so altered that you can't even see the historic character. So those properties that are non-contributing, they're in this geographic boundary that we draw, but they're not going to benefit because there's no negative, but they're not going to be eligible for historic tax credits. If they're 15 years old, I think is the rule. Can't remember. For the city's tax abatement, you would be eligible.
Yeah, if you're
there's an age
It's
cut.
not brand new.
Yeah.
And it's not for additions, it's to improve the assessed value of the existing structure.
Right. So Skip has a question, which has me scared.
So, the 51% doesn't just trigger FEMA, it triggers compliance with the city's coastal overlay district.
Yeah.
So you're not talking just about FEMA. If you got 51% damage, you suddenly get swept into the city's coastal overlay district, which has, how do they treat basements in coastal overlay?
I'm not zoning expert on that.
Anyway, there's a whole lot of considerations that you have to do. Your house has to be a certain level. You can't have slab on grade. You can't do this, you can't do that. These are city requirements that you would be swept into unless there is an historic exemption to the city's coastal overlay district as well. So it's not just FEMA. There's a whole
And
lot.
the statewide building code, that's really, I mean, that's,
Yeah, but the Norfolk coastal overlay is pretty.
yeah.
So I'm not pushing you off the stage, but I just want to take this juncture of the conversation to describe why, after we were super skeptical, this is where we got in the conversation as a board and we're like, wait a minute, this seems like it makes sense, right? Why don't we get over being angry about what we're angry about and just push that aside and think about whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing for the neighborhood. And trust me, Vanessa is here, Vanessa's on the board. We were like, Vanessa and I specifically were like, so, like asking hard questions, like along the lines of what everyone here is. And we're like, wait a minute, this seems kind of like a no-brainer. Because when something happens to my house, I don't want to come and have an argument about why I'm, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the way I thought about it. So I'll leave that with you.
And it's getting late. I'm happy to answer additional questions.
Yeah.
My contact information, that's my cell phone. It's ready to me. That's Susan's contact information, so you can get to hers.
And we'll put this up on the website here in the next day or so, and you can come grab it.
Who does the application and how much does it cost and who's going to pay for it?
I don't know who's gonna pay for it. I sincerely hope my office gets selected to do the work.
And what does it cost?
So I think our budget is about $150,000 to do the entire neighborhood. We didn't really talk about what's involved, but we do a building by building survey in a tablet where we enter everything into GIS so it can go into the city's mapping. It goes into the state archives, about 6 pages of data entry for each property. That gets turned into, so digital database, but also a survey tool for Susan in her office and Sophia to use. You know, like if your house does sustain significant damage, there will be photographs from this effort that can tell you what the details look like in an architectural description. We have to do detailed history of the community, detailed architectural description, and then a building by building inventory where we decide, make a recommendation for every contributing and non-contributing resource. Public engagement, there's a meeting at the State Review Board. So it is about a year-long process. And you know, the end result, I think, is a really great resource for the community too. We really encourage civic leagues and neighborhood associations for designated areas to like use that history on your website, talk about it, celebrate it at your community events. Because, you know, we have a very transient community in Norfolk, and sometimes that's the best way to kind of get people connected to the neighborhood.
So Susan, I'm not going to ask you how we're going to pay for it. I think a more appropriate question would be, how were previous historic districts paid for?
Well, there's been grant money involved, private investment. This might be a combination of public-private. What I would say is that if you wanted to maybe discuss going forward with the PIP, and then I would say.
With the what, I'm sorry?
The preliminary information.
Form, yeah, okay.
And then see where the neighborhood is at that point. But I will say it's a huge investment. The city is in the middle of doing a citywide survey, but we wouldn't be doing as in-depth of survey for a state national register nomination in this area. In fact, the plan was that because there was so little interest in this area, this was kind of at the end of our plan, as I explained to you. And so this was kind of a surprise, but what I would say about this is, you know, we would really need to know if we had an overwhelming 50%, over 50% interest in this for the investment to be made. And then I think, you know, then I, you know, have to work with the council people and let them know your interest. And, you know, I would do everything on my side to help coordinate that. But
So
right now,
in the past,
today, I don't have the funding.
I'm with you. So I'm asking about the past so that we have a broad understanding of the options, right? So Valentine Place, Park Place, Colonial Place, were city funds, city budget funds used at all?
On those, I believe, and those were before I got here, but to the best of my recollection, they were either CDBG or they were state grants.
What is CBDG? Yeah, I don't know what that
Community
is.
Development Block Grant did a city, they used money to do a citywide survey, and so they used the money for that. Which, you know, I've been trying to dig into myself, but that has to be citywide, it can't just be location specific because it has a income requirement on that one. But the state, they have CLG and cost share every year, the State Historic Preservation Office, but that is not, I would not, sometimes they only get $150,000 for the entire Commonwealth. So everybody who's a CLG is applying, so there's 37 CLGs applying for a cut of that money.
So if we reached out to the commercial or the apartment building owners, Cavalier Land, Hague Properties, I'm not as familiar with all the names of them, but their signs are on all the buildings, right? If we reached out to them and said, hey, you know, we could potentially seek commercial, like private funding from them.
So you're all about this. That's what.
No, I'm trying to lay out how we would.
You're all about
What
this.
private part was gonna be, then I would try and make up I would try and get funding from.
Yeah.
Who are the other people?
Meet the board after that, together, because this is brought to our attention. Like,
Yeah, but-
are we gonna bring this information specifically to have a conversation?
I understand that, Vanessa, but who are the other people besides, other than the email that he sent out, the dude that owns the apartment building down the street from me? Who are the other people that all of a sudden jumped in and said, we want an historic district? Who are they? Like, where are they? Like, why can't I know that? I'm part of the Civic League. Why can't I know that? Are they here? I want to see them. I want to understand what their reason is for having this be an issue right now in this world that we're living in. Why?
Well, I'm sure Patty can tell them. What's the girl's name?
Chris.
I don't know who he is. Right, but who else? Because he made the statement that there were other people, and she made the statement, there were other people who had reached out to her.
There were other commercial development properties.
They're not people that live in the neighborhood, people that own buildings in the neighborhood. So
Who
okay, I saw.
I think
Mark
Yeah, this is on
Kutos
my
was here
mind.
earlier.
this is also on my mind, I think.
Yeah, Mark Kutos was here, great, he's gone. He walked out with her. I get it. You know, so, you know, we got the commercial developers that are all about this, but what about the people that own properties right here in West Kent, a block from where they're trying to do this?
So clearly it's motivated more from a commercial property standpoint. I'm here. What's the negative impact to the residential owner?
Let them pay for it. Yeah, let them pay for it. And I mean.
Why do we need to vote on this now?
Yeah, why are we voting on this now? I mean, what are we
Until
doing?
know where the money's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, and you're all about it.
We're not at a point where we need to obligate it.
You're
And
very.
we're not gonna ask the residents.
For money.
by the way.
Well,
yeah.
I'm not gonna ask that.
Well, I understand that, but already I've got
I think
him
we're,
and her who are all about it right out of the gate.
We
And
were all
that's,
about actually presenting the information. to
no,
you.
that's not the way it's been
Well,
presented.
I'll say he was not about it when I talked to him.
I understand that.
That's why I've been trying to.
Information, just information.
I don't,
Yeah, I mean, this is great.
As a resident, I don't feel like you guys are automatically presented it. The Paddock property was mentioned in the newsletter. It sounded like that was good.
I just had a question, for you, Susan, sorry. Like in your experience with this, like, you know, I was thinking like who's flipping the bill, $150,000 is a lot of money, for you to get rid of this size. And like, and I remember the word incentive, there is incentives, tax credits are a huge incentive, especially if you want to come and build an apartment building and rake in cash and you're from somewhere else. In order to do that, they have to adhere to the guidelines of the aesthetic and prove that they're.
For new construction.
No. So new construction is not protected.
Only for
even if it's-
historic buildings.
So it would
Okay,
have
so
to
it
have
has
been,
exist
it would have to have been built when the neighborhood was built. They would define a time window, like that's all part of the research process. So what I'm trying to convey is that, one, we're definitely not proposing paying for it, right? We're proposing starting a process where we determine what like embarking on the process of even getting to the point where we could vote, could have the community engagement process to then decide as an entire community, not 30 people sitting in the church. It would be everybody in the circle would be involved, right? But what the city needs is the Civic League to say there's enough interest to go into this process.
Right. Gosh,
Does
I was
that make
wondering where you
sense?
can find, like, if you create an incentive, people are gonna, you know, like outside investors. are gonna be like, well,
I think that these-
But they wouldn't be eligible unless they're doing something historic, like it has to meet the eligibility.
Is there any way to prevent those incentives from attracting people that maybe want to come in and not to be a part of the community in a way that this community wants them to?
No.
If I'm someone that has a lot of money, just capital, I might go, oh, new historic area. I'm gonna go buy up a bunch of properties and start making Airbnbs or whatever, and I'm gonna rake in tax credits.
We do not find this to be,
No.
flippers do not go
Nothing.
into historic neighborhoods. In
Okay.
fact, quite the opposite. When they find out they've gotten there and they find out that's what's involved,
Yeah.
they usually pack up and sell. To the new-
Or are there healthy incentives then to raise the money in a way, like, that's a negative, like, is there a positive?
I do think that it's impossible to say what an owner of a multifamily building is gonna do. But to your concern about life safety issues, any historic multifamily building that is going to undergo a major renovation is going to be required to be brought up to compliance for life safety. And so if you set in motion a scenario where you're incentivizing major renovation, then you are making it more likely that those life safety issues will be addressed.
And that sounds good.
So
Even
just
if it's not FEMA standard, there still have to be
Any renovation.
like
a
any-
fire suppression system,
Yeah.
sprinkler, upgrading,
So
or
what are the FEMA standards that they are going to be able to not?
they're
abide
five:
by?
elevation, demolition, flood vents.
I'm saying that's what they're exempt from?
Yeah, that is.
There are 5 things you can do in FEMA's playbook that protect buildings from flooding. 5.
You can do, but what I'm at.
Those are the 5 that you can be exempted from.
Can do.
It's like the things that.
The exemption gives you an option to come up with an equivalent sixth
all of
option.
those
Yeah.
things.
Correct.
It's either those or here.
Right.
So it's that or.
Whatever.
And so
Can we bring this to a vote?
Yeah.
It's time to like move on. All right, let's do something. All right, so
I get one question first.
What is it? Are we supposed to be voting for this
Because
tonight?
we talk a lot of times about it's 50% plus one person, as it were. Ultimately, to decide whether the community is in favour. But who gets a vote? How does that vote get counted? Is it one per property, one per person, resident, is it rental property? So
Barely got anybody here.
how does it all work?
I think there are
Yeah, we're
3
still
different
already-
entities. So I think Susan needs to speak to the city's view on that. I think you guys need to speak specifically, but before you guys do that, if this moves forward at the end of the process, in that final public meeting, we would talk about how you can object. And the process for formal objection, at that point, you need to write a letter to the state's preservation office saying I object. And the state law says 50%, but the way that the state historic preservation office works, they would pause the project at well below 50%. If they heard any rumblings, they would say, we need to do more community engagement and see if this is the right fit. And they would mobilize their staff to come down here and work with the community and sort through what the concerns are before they would ever put it on.
It's not a vote, it's not gonna be on a ballot somewhere.
No.
Yeah.
It's a general consensus, somebody's going to work out.
I'll say, we tried to, so I live in Valentine Place, if you don't mind, I apologize,
Please.
I know I'm with you, like, so, moving. In Valentine Place, we are a national and state, recognized, area, and we work in serving the local groups, but realizing the costs for our residents. To even explore that, we had to do exactly what you guys are doing right now, and present it to the city. Here's the option, here's what we could or could not do. And we went door to door, we counted our rooftops, and it was just not, the support wasn't there to move forward. So like process wise, like this is like ground level. When we talk about educate, like now you know, but nothing's going to move forward unless the majority of the residents, say, this is something that it just won't happen. So what we transitioned to is looking at overlays, right? Just like Berkeley has different ways. Our thing was we have stored properties where we got cookie cutters going up next to it. It just is not the best thing that we want for our neighborhood. So like process is right here. I understand like I overstand, but nothing's gonna move unless the masses say no. It just won't happen. Yeah, it just won't happen.
So any last quick conversations before we go to a vote?
What are we voting on?
We're voting whether or not to move forward with basically filing a preliminary information form and asking for the city to embark on the process to.
Wait a minute, was that in the minutes that you sent out to in the email that we were gonna have a vote tonight?
Yeah, the board voted at the board meeting to have a vote at the resident meeting.
All right, whatever.
Information
I mean, it's
overview is
whatever.
just to have a preliminary information sharing, just to share it. And then to decide whether or not we move toward the next steps. It's not whether or not we pursue the designation, whether or not we are approving the designation. It's just to do further information searching with the city.
This is where we go off and actually start to put work into figuring out all the above and in community engagement process and all that. And in a year from now, we will be voting, if it goes to that point, on whether or not we 50% plus one person in the neighborhood wanted to be designated as a historic district. Right? All right, so if you are in favor of pursuing the process of applying for a state and national historic register district for West Ghent, please vote yes.
Yes. Yes.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think I heard 3 yeses.
Could you type in online? Can you please just type it in chat? It'll be easier for me to tally.
If you are a no, please raise your hand or vote online. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it was 14 in the room, 4, 8 against in the room, and we have to tally the online votes.
I'm selling my house.
Okay, thanks for being here and thanks for your patience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan and Paige. And Grace.
Can you